right now there's a very ugly situation unfolding in Guyana, Essequibo. Now that's the situation that's unfolding between Venezuela and Guyana. Essentially, Venezuela is voting to whether or not to annex a part of Guyana due to its historical significance to Venezuela. And that is true. The area in question, Essequibo, however you pronounce it, did traditionally belong to Venezuela. I don't think anybody's really denying that. It is, in fact, true. But it's kind of disturbing that the current leader of the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela is putting up a public vote as to whether or not to annex this territory from Guyana, which is currently holding it. You see, Guyana is the holder of it right now, and you can argue that Guyana really is a country that was created by imperialism specifically for the purposes of imperialism, etc. And therefore, some people believe that they have essentially no rights to exist, or that their autonomy means nothing, and that Venezuela certainly has the right to just take that land back, which seems to be the case with Venezuela itself. But there's something very disturbing about this, that the leader of the Bolivarian revolution really does feel that they can just walk into another country and just take land because it has historically belonged to them about, I believe it was about 150 years ago. See, now normally I really would advocate the land being returned to them, but this isn't the right way to do it. You see, the problem is they're trying to do a vote among the Venezuelan population as to whether or not to go in and essentially take this land by force. And the public of Venezuela will be able to choose whether or not the government goes in to be able to do that. And that is a step more democratic than anything that's being done in the West, where wars essentially aren't put to a vote. They are just carried out against anyone's wishes, where the public isn't even consulted at all. The people that should be asked is the people who live in that area. Do they want to leave Guyana and be a part of Venezuela? Maybe somebody should ask them. Ask them what they want. Ask them where they want to be. Because if there was a large majority that did want to leave and join Venezuela, then it would certainly be okay to annex them and have them join the country. Just like how the people of Donbass, Lugansk, etc., did actually vote and did want to leave Ukraine and join Russia. That is their free and fair choice. I think it would be better if they remained their own, independent republic, but it is their free choice to join Russia if they want. But that kind of choice isn't being offered to the people in Essequibo or Essequibo, whatever. This is essentially the people of Venezuela deciding that for them. And this is very un-Bolivarian-like, where everything has had a very heavy emphasis on democracy, where they've had more elections in the last 8 years of Venezuela than the U.S. has had in the last 20 years. Of course, the opposition always claiming that they're not legitimate elections, and then the U.S. backing them up on that, and then never showing any actual evidence of that. But there has always been a very heavy emphasis on democracy, like giving X amount of state dollars to certain barrios, and the barrios deciding how they want to spend that infrastructure money, particularly. So there has always been that very heavy emphasis on democracy, but where is that in this situation? Asking the Venezuelan people whether or not they essentially want to go to war is democratic, sure. But what about the people who actually live in that area? Where do they want to go? Do they want to join Venezuela? That's the question that's essentially not being asked in this situation. From the research that I was able to do, there doesn't seem to be much of any real sentiment that has been put forward publicly. And let's really be honest, this has very little to do with Venezuelan pride or even nationalism. This has to do with the fact that it's a very oil-rich area. Because all of this effort and the extreme political risk for Maduro and Venezuela that this has, both domestically and internationally, wouldn't be worth it just on a matter of national pride. It would be worth it for a huge stockpile of oil. So this seems very un-Bolivarian-like. And keep in mind that this is occurring at the same time that it's been acknowledged by the Bolivarian government that they're engaging in talks behind the scenes with the United States to make concessions to the empire, which would also be anti-Bolivarian to begin with. Now, you could make the argument that they're kind of really forced to, considering how much destruction has been put on the country as a result of U.S. sanctions, banking sanctions, blockades, etc. And that would certainly be true. Of course, you could also rightfully blame much of the Venezuelan government for failing to diversify their economy and failing to, actually do socialism. That thing where you stop using the market mechanism and use an economic plan. The thing that socialism actually is. I mean, that literally is the difference between socialism and capitalism, is no longer using the market as a mechanism by which to distribute goods to the public and to plan where capital goes. And Venezuela is still essentially using capitalism and allowing capitalist parties that are even owned by the United States to continue to exist. I don't know. I mean, the United States wouldn't allow a political party that was controlled by another country to exist. Why should Venezuela have to do that? There were so many glaring flaws in this Bolivarian democracy, this whole Bolivarian experiment, this so-called 21st century socialism, which is just capitalism with a lot of state spending on social affairs. And that's all it's actually been. And this is something that a lot of us warned right from the beginning, that none of this actually was socialism, and that it would eventually sell out and that it would eventually fail because it wasn't actually socialism. It was failing to actually take in the part of it that actually was socialism. The part where investment, where capital goes, is not determined by the market, but by a state plan. That's the whole point of economic planning. And everybody just kind of screamed at us saying, you're just being negative, or you're reactionary for advocating for the thing that it's supposed to be. And then sometimes screaming racist because the people who were doing it were brown, because it makes sense to scream racist at, a third worldist because, third worldism places emphasis on the people in the third world who are overwhelming majority a people of color, because calling that racist makes sense somehow. But all of this was perfectly predictable. A lot of us, and I don't just mean third worldists, a lot of us who just really did recognize from the beginning what this was, knew this was going to happen. That every time you come up with this substitute for actual socialism, that's, more applicable in our day while eliminating the core of what is socialism always ends up turning like this. Socialism with Chinese characteristics. Capitalist Vietnam. Yeah, capitalist Vietnam. Vietnam is capitalist. It's a fucking market economy. It does not do economic planning. Setting certain targets for large businesses doesn't constitute having an economic plan. Those are some guidelines that the government has put out. It is still driven by market. Resources are still distributed through the economy according to a market. Capital is still invested according to a market, not an economic plan. This is in no way comparable in any way, shape, or form to what economic planning actually is, which the Soviet Union was the perfect example of. And none of this, oh, if they didn't do it the white people way, then it must be wrong. And then accusing people of being racist. I mean, the Soviets literally showed how to do it. That's like saying Lenin came up with the theory of the Vanguard Party, so therefore the Vanguard Party is racist. I mean, it's the same kind of nonsense. And it's like a case of we told you so. There was a lot of, Maoists that said that this was going to happen. There was some contingent of MLs that said this was going to happen. Most MLs just jumped on board and just completely defended everything the Bolivarian Revolution did without question and would not accept any criticism whatsoever about it. I mean, you've literally got the Venezuelan government criminalizing the Communist Party of Venezuela, having members of the party thrown in jail. I mean, I don't know how much more obvious it can be at that point. This was all perfectly predictable by anyone who had a modicum of integrity whatsoever to honestly look at everything that was going on. Yes, I supported the Bolivarian Revolution, and I still support it as being better than the alternative of capitalism. Even though it basically kind of is still technically capitalism. It's still better than a US-dominated government. And that's essentially the main argument that's made by a lot of people defending what Maduro is doing here that is wrong. Well, do you want a US-backed government to return? No. I want Maduro to stop doing this thing that he should not be doing. Believe it or not, there's actually space between doing something you're not supposed to be doing and having somebody else in charge. Like Maduro can actually change policies and still be Bolivarian. There are too many people who are refusing to criticize Maduro for this, that are refusing to criticize Venezuela for this. What they are doing is wrong. And I don't think this is even in line with the values of Bolivarianism. I don't think they're even staying true to their own vision. And there's a lot of people who are unwilling to even argue that. They're not even willing to even look at the issue and even look at the nuances to determine if that's even true. Their automatic response is, if you do not support everything that Venezuela does right away, without question, without nuance, you're automatically supporting the US. And yes, SOCOM is setting up in Guyana right now to essentially prepare for war against Venezuela. I mean, they've openly said that. And of course, the US is not being altruistic. Guyana is a US ally, and the US has access to their oil resources, etc. So we're basically looking at a fight over oil. Again, capitalism. The profit motive of two different groups fighting over a natural resource rather than that resource just being allocated as according to have need. And I'm sorry, but there's too many people in the community that aren't willing to look at this honestly with any kind of nuance whatsoever and are just blatantly siding with Maduro no matter what. You know, that vote kind of like the vote blue no matter who nonsense, except done from a socialist perspective. You are allowed to criticize, and you need to do so. A failure to criticize these leaders will enable them to continue to do things like this. Isn't that supposed to be our strength? Isn't that what a people's democracy is supposed to be about? You're supposed to be able to question the government and to decide what policies, and a part of being able to decide what policies is an ability to criticize them. But nobody wants to do that. Everybody wants to just blatantly support everything that they do. And there's not many people willing to really be honest about this. And that needs to change. There needs to be real legitimate criticism. Nobody here is arguing that Maduro should just suddenly retire and hand the country over to the United States. Those of us who are critical of him are just telling him to stop doing this to Guyana because it's not right. Because the people who live in that area, their wishes are not being respected. Sure, the people of Venezuela should be consulted as to whether or not this should go on, but so should the people who live in the area that they're trying to annex. And it's their opinion that nobody seems to be concerned with whatsoever. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.